So 2012 has a lot of new features, and it's going to be difficult to go over everything that's new. So I'll try to really focus on the highlights, and there's a lot of new stuff that's happening inside of Action. If we go inside of Action, the first thing that I'd like to highlight is the fact that we actually redesigned completely the node bin, and the primary motivation behind this is that there's a lot of new stuff, new objects, new tools that are making their way inside of Action, and the smaller node bin was simply becoming unpractical as we were adding new functionality into Action. So you will see that you have something that is very similar in essence to what we have inside of Batch, and we actually added a hotkey that allows you to switch between the object menu and the node bin, and that would be Control tilde. Again, Control Escape allows you to switch to, Control Tab allows you to switch to the Batch node bin. Control tilde allows you to switch to the Action node bin. So when you're in Batch, you can actually very easily switch from one to the other. It takes a bit of using at the beginning, but it will feel very natural as you move forward. So the thing that I'd like us to focus on at this point is some of the new functionality around lights. It's a strong theme of this 2012 release. And so here what I'm showing you is essentially a simple scene where I have a 3D text that's in the middle of this box that I constructed with substance textures. And you will see that right now I already have like an interesting lighting effect that's being applied to the scene. And this is right now using a new type of light that is called area lights. So if I switch to my schematic, and here I select my area light, you will see that its icon is slightly different from a regular point light. It has a spreading, but what elliptical area lights do, they actually allow you to simulate kind of like an array of lights that have the shape of either a rectangle or an ellipse. In this case, this is an elliptical area, and I can actually fully control the width and the height of the elliptical region, and you see it creates very interesting effects within the scene by varying the actual size of the area light. Of course, this can be cumulated also to the spreading to create very focused effects or very broad effects depending on the spreading effect. I'd like to remind you also that you still have access to the profile of the light, which can allow you to further tweak also how you want the fall off to appear inside of your scene. So a lot of flexibility that's there. The area lights can also be set to rectangular, and it's a very similar, again, control, except the area, instead of being an ellipse, is going to be more of a rectangle. As you see, it kind of changes slightly the effect within my scene here, but provides for the same controls over the area. Another type of light that we're introducing is the directional light. So the directional light is a bit peculiar because no matter where it's located in space, it doesn't actually make a difference. It's going to generate the same effect. The only thing that matters with directional lights is actually, well, the direction that you're giving to that light. Directional lights are typically very handy to actually simulate light sources that would be located at infinity. And again, the thing to remember is that as you're moving this around, it actually won't actually have any particular effect. It's only the orientation of the vector that will matter. Let me switch back to, and of course we still have the point spot, okay, that hasn't changed. It's still here, pretty much the same familiar thing. And as you see, it also has a different rendition from the rectangle, the ellipse area. All of these things actually add a lot of more flexibility. We have yet one more light type to take a look at, which is the ambient light source. Now, ambient light source are a bit peculiar because their purpose mainly is to kind of lift the entire scene with the color of the light. So typically in 3D they can be used to make sure that you don't have shadows that are super black, and so you want to lift them with an ambient light. It actually has that effect over the entire scene. If I look at the default parameters of an ambient light, and let me switch to f4, you see that it has a very kind of flattening effect on the entire scene. This is because here it's a white ambient light. You will notice that the ambient light also has here a parameter that allows you to go from a pure ambient source to a pure point light source. Okay, so by default it's kind of a mixture in between. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is switch it to 0% shading, which makes it completely ambient. Now, of course, the result is not very interesting as it is here, but the very interesting thing with lights in general is that they can all have, first of all, negative colors if you want to, and they can also have negative intensities. So let me switch this to -10% here. And here's an interesting thing that happens. As you see, I still have my elliptical light that's being applied, but on top of that, I'm adding an ambient effect with a negative intensity. And the really cool thing is that what it's doing, it's actually affecting the contrast of my scene. So it's interesting to think of lights in a broader, let's say in a broader range of applications than just actually lighting the scene. Inside of Action, you can potentially use them also as almost grading tools. So something to look out for, because you essentially have with ambient lights a contrast operator that affects the entire scene. And of course, this can always be mixed with a shading behavior. So you have a lot of flexibility there. Keep in mind again, because lights have colors, when they have negative intensities, you can also use them to add some color in your scene while building some contrast. Of course, here with negative intensities, you have to think subtractively. So it takes a bit of a habit, but if you come from film, it's going to be very natural. Okay, so again, something to think about is that the tools and the lighting tools are, of course, very cool to do lighting of the scene, but they're also very powerful grading operators that can affect the entire scene, not only portions of the scenes, because they all support selective lighting links. So that's cool. But we haven't seen all of the light types. There's yet another one. So I'm going to hide the ambient light for now. Switch back. So here I'm back with my elliptical light. And there's one thing that I'd like to show you, which is IBL lights. So IBL stands for image-based lighting, and this is a technique that has been used a lot in 3D to essentially capture the lighting conditions on set to better then apply them on the actual geometry that's supposed to blend into the scene. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with this type of images, which are actually, captured from a chrome ball. This is typically what you would call an IBL map. What the techniques, and so there you have multiple types of IBL maps. This is a cubic map, this is an angular map, and this is what you would call a cylindrical map. So the types of devices that captures each one of these is slightly different, but I'm sure you've actually seen this is really like a chrome ball that has been photographed on location, in this particular case in Florence. So what happens is that when you use an IBL map inside of Action, well, it will kind of encapsulate the entire action scene in a virtual sphere on which every pixel of the IBL map will act as a light that looks at the scene. The very interesting thing about this is that it actually changes the color of the pixels in the scene. Here you see I have an IBL map that is currently parented to a camera, and IBL maps can actually be found either in the relighting tab here where you have an IBL icon, and of course they're associated to a media, so you just drag them into the schematic. But for them to affect the entire scene, you actually need to parent them to the camera. You can also parent an IBL map to an object as such here to have an IBL map only affect a specific object in the scene. But so let's take a look at the effect. I'm selecting my IBL map and switching back to my F4 result, and then I unhide the IBL. And you see it has a very pleasing effect on the entire scene. Not only that, but if you look at the geometry in the center, now it has kind of turned it into a reflective material, giving that very polished chrome look. If we look at the options of the IBL, you will see that we can actually control what type of lighting we would like to create, lighting effect we'd like to create. Would we want to have something that would translate into a very reflective behavior, but we can also boost the diffusion of the light. And as you see, as I boost it up, first of all, you see that my object now no longer looks really like a very polished chrome object. It now looks as something that's a lot more well, diffuse. So that's the point of this particular parameter that you have here. And of course, I can tweak the intensity, make my effect stronger. And you see it combines with all the other lights that I can have inside of my scene. This is a very powerful lighting tool, and it's a very powerful integration tool that you now have inside of Action. It gives very spectacular results on geometry. But one thing that I'd like to point out, again, is the ability, and that you should think about hijacking these functionality also to serve them to solve compositing problems. And I'd just like to show you an example here where I'm going to use the same IBL map, but to actually help me blend a bunch of layers, key layers. So here I have 2 green screens here, and I'm comping them inside of Action. And as you see, I have my IBL here that's parented to my camera, and I'm just going to hide it so that you see the effect that it can have inside of the scene. So here from the working camera, just that you understand what's happening, I have a bunch of cards that are located in 3D space. And one interesting thing that I want to point out is that you see I have one IBL here that has the mention between parentheses that says back. I can actually turn any IBL into a background. And what this does is actually it makes it visible. So when I orbit around, you will see that it actually shows me the virtual sphere, the actual texture that is being mapped on the virtual sphere that is then used to do the lighting. So in this particular case, the IBL that I have here is not actually lighting anything because it's not parented to anything inside of my scene. I've just done this so that I could have separate blurring controls and actually see it visually inside of my scene. But so the thing here, this particular IBL that is parented to the camera is one that actually can have an effect on the scene. So let's switch back. And here you see I have my layers that are stacked in 3D space, and the only thing that I've done to them is that I've actually removed the green spill from the keying. If I unhide the IBL, you will see that an interesting thing happens is that, again, the colors of the IBL texture and the way that they actually are used as lights to looking at the scene actually change the color of all of my layers inside of 3D space. And what you see is I've actually cranked up the diffuse offset to a very high number because I don't want my image layers to act as reflective cards. I want them to actually inherit the colors of the environment, even though they're actually still perfectly flat cards. But the interesting thing to note is that it does have an effect, a blending effect that is common to all the layers in the scene. So it is something to keep in mind. It's not a silver bullet, but it's just an extra tool in your arsenal that can be helpful when you're actually dealing with blending problems of multiple green screens that were shot independently yet are supposed to match into an environment. And if you have an environment map, it can be useful to try. So moving on, I would like to show you another really, long-awaited feature of 2012, which is shadows.